I'm not finding the words I'd like, so let's pause it for a second. Just 1 second.
A reoccurring theme in the final episode of Better Call Saul was a time machine. In each of the flashback scenes we got, we saw Jimmy ask these characters what they would do if they could use a time machine. The episode opens with a flashback scene to the Bagman episode in season 5. Mike says if he had a time machine, he would go back to the first day he took a bribe. And then later on in the episode, we get a flashback to season 5, episode 15 of Breaking Bad, where Saul and Walter White were waiting to get taken by Ed the Disappearer. Saul asks Walter the question, and Walter sees through the analogy.
You are talking about regrets, so if you want to ask about regrets, just ask about regrets.
I love how in these flashback scenes, Walter is 10 times more angry. He's like a pissed off bouncy ball.
Stay in your lane.
He looks down at the watch that Jesse got him, which of course represents his regret and guilt for Jesse. And he says his biggest regret is him leaving grey matter with that situation with Elliot and Gretchen. He says to Walter what he regrets is when he did a slip and fall, one of his scams, and hurt his knee, and that was his big regret. But then in the Chuck scene, it's shown that this time machine analogy is from Chuck.
If you don't like where you're heading, there's no shame in going back and changing your path.
And then in the courtroom, in the most defining scene in the whole show, we see he drops the Saul Goodman act, and he finally, once and for all, turns back into Jimmy McGill. No more lies, no more game playing. He had managed to work himself down to 7 years in prison, but when he heard what was happening with Kim and the Howard situation, he took all the blame. He made this courtroom his time machine. This was him rewriting everything. And so the show ended with him getting 86 years in prison. Kim is a lawyer again. And even though Jimmy had redeemed himself massively by doing this, he's going to spend the rest of his life now being this legend of prison. He's the bad guy with the finger guns. It is a massively bittersweet ending, but it's satisfying. The downfall of Jimmy's story has been selfishness, not taking accountability. So I love that the ending of his story is when he does take accountability and he makes the ultimate sacrifice so that Kim can go on. What I don't like about it is at the start of season 6, we saw Kim was the one initiating in the Howard stuff. Yeah, it was Jimmy's fault that she had started doing it, but these are all of Kim's choices. I don't really like that he took all of the blame just for Kim. He had 7 years to do. Now he's doing 86. That's life in prison, by the way, if you haven't worked that one out. Now, fortunately, while I do think this is a massively conclusive and satisfying end to the show, it has been left open to where they could do a lot more to it, even though a lot of the story will just be left to the imagination, just like with Breaking Bad. I mean, it was over 6 years until we heard from Jesse again. Vince Gilligan was just going to leave that as how it ended. It literally said in the script,
Jesse speeds us toward the chain link locked gate. Bam! We smash through it like it was nothing. We leave the compound behind. Close angle on Jesse. Grimly determined, fearing nothing. He speeds toward the darkness. It's up to us to say where he's headed. I like to call it something better and leave it at that. So I guess there won't be a sequel. But Jesse stays alive.
So while the final scene in the show was profound, it was sad, meaningful, it was clearly done open-ended to where they could add more, and I think, judging by what this episode did, they will. In the finale of Breaking Bad, they had no idea years later they would do a movie or even a spin-off. The whole story of Better Call Saul has always been about Jimmy McGill and his rise and fall to what happened in Breaking Bad. The black and white jean scenes have always been a question of, will he get caught, and if or when he does, how will he handle it? Will he run? Will he handle it himself? Will he turn himself in? And we saw a really negative turn of events, and he decided to be even worse than Saul was, but then in the end essentially sacrificed himself for Kim and finally took accountability. This is where he belongs now, and so the final point of Jimmy's story is him taking accountability, facing the music, just like with Walter White in Breaking Bad. Breaking Bad above all was Walter White's story, as Better Call Saul is for Jimmy, and so the end of the show is the end for his character. That's how his story ends. With Kim, however, and other surviving characters of the Breaking Bad universe, there's actually potential for quite a bit more. Now, just recently, Peter Gould and Vince Gilligan were asked if they have any plans, and of course, they didn't say they did, but AMC really wants them to. So now that Better Call Saul has ended, let's actually talk about what could happen next in the Breaking Bad universe, and what happens after the events of the finale. Now that Kim is a lawyer again, she can come in and out of prison and visit Jimmy, so she can still talk to him and they have these smoke break scenes. You might have noticed in this scene the ember of the lighter is coloured. The only times we've ever seen colour in the black and white scenes in the show is the Saul Goodman commercial in the reflection of his glasses, and here we see colour in the ember of the lighter, so this shows that their spark is back, so to speak. Now I do actually think we're going to see Kim again, not anytime soon, but I think it's almost the exact same thing as Jesse, and it's interesting because they are the partners of the protagonists in both of the shows, and they're the characters that met each other. They are both the biggest victims and biggest survivors of what happened, and I think it's really interesting how Jesse was mentioned in this episode in particular. We heard Francesca mention they found this car at the border because Badger took it there, but in this episode at first we saw Saul create this fiction that he was essentially held hostage by Walt and Jesse, and that although Walt is dead, Jesse is still out there and he has people that would do something to him had he said anything, and he tries to blame that as the reason he ran away to Nebraska.
I ran, but not from the police, from them. Walter White might be dead. Jesse Pinkman and the others, they're still out there, somewhere.
And I still think about how in El Camino we found out so much about his new identity in Alaska. It was so conclusive to his story, so definitive, but we don't find out his first name. He's just Mr. Driscoll.
Mr. Driscoll.
Also, the first thing that Vince Gilligan wrote of El Camino was Jesse's letter to Brock. When Ed was taking Jesse to Alaska, we were meant to hear Jesse's narration of the letter, but it was cut, and now Aaron Paul and Vince Gilligan are the only people in the world to know what that letter says. There's all these things that we still don't know from El Camino, but you would have thought, in a project based around filling in the blanks and finishing off a character's story, we would have known. We didn't get that mention of Jesse's first name or Mr. Driscoll in Better Call Saul, so I just think we will get that now in another project. You do see some silly rumours about what they could do after Better Call Saul. I saw on a TikTok the other day that someone said in years to come Holly could go to Alaska to look for Jesse. I think when it comes to Jesse, it would strictly be to do with Kim. They've met before, and like I said, they're the partners of the protagonists. And remember, Jesse is the only other surviving person that could vouch for Saul and cause his numbers to go down. The ending of Better Call Saul was him taking accountability. There's nothing to say that after the show now, he can't get his numbers reduced. The Holly going to Alaska idea is really good if it's set like 10-15 years away from where we left off. It would be a bit like Star Wars Force Awakens. Are the stories really true? And Aaron Paul actually has to play a 40-year-old. That would be amazing. Obviously, if these writers did do it, they'd make sure it wasn't comical or novelty. What's certain is that if Jesse does appear again, it won't be him reverting back to crime. El Camino still has to resolve something. It's no good if he goes to Alaska and he does exactly what Gene does. The thing with Gene, Jimmy, is that he can't help himself. We saw in El Camino, Jesse can. Different to other projects on TV right now or in theatres, El Camino really was a movie about filling in the blanks. So that's why I would get a Kim project, and that's why one day, at least I hope, we get to see the White family again. I never thought I'd be that happy to see Marie.
I have nothing.
What did you think? What did you think about the ending of Better Call Saul? And what other projects do you think we could see in the Breaking Bad universe? Do you even want any more shows or movies? Or do you think it should just be left alone for now? Let me know what you think down below. Press the like button if you enjoyed the video. Subscribe if you're new. Thank you for watching. I'll see you soon.
I'm not finding the words I'd like, so let's pause it for a second. Just 1 second.
Walter, put your